Welcome to UnstuckAF, a podcast here to help you do you better. There's a path that starts where you are, passes through who you are, and leads where you want to go. We're here to hear from people who've walked that path or who are walking it right now. This is Orlando Bishop, Coach Orlando, and I thank you for listening as we learn how to get unstuck, how to be unstuck, how to live unstuck. Unstuck as fuck. Welcome to UnstuckAF. Now, we have a first. It's not the first episode ever. It's not any of those things. But what we have is our first guest who is joining us for a second time. We're doing a follow-up interview with our guest, Kam Katen. Those of you who listened last season may remember episode 9 of season 1, where we talked about seeing and being seen better. So Kam, welcome back. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to be able to have another conversation with you. Always.
Yeah, me too. And definitely wanted to have you on to sort of, maybe not part 2, but give a little bit of follow-up to the conversation that we had. For those who have not yet listened to episode 9, and by the way, listeners, I recommend you go back and check it out. It was a great conversation, and we got a lot of great feedback on it. And there'll definitely be some context for this conversation. But that said, when we talked about seeing and being seen better last time and the role that plays in your life, maybe you could share with those who may need to go there later the thumbnail on what that meant for you or means for you.
Sure. For the purposes of that conversation, we were talking about my gender identity and the impact of not feeling seen by my mom when I was a kid. And I think that has to do with assimilation in the larger culture. And then also just about how important as a parent being my authentic self is for my kid who has some challenges, and that I really believe that the best way to help her, sort of love and embrace herself is if I do that, if I model that.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that takes us pretty smoothly into where we're going to go. So I'm gonna go there and say, in my opinion, you've very clearly modeled it, and maybe you can share with the listeners what I mean by that.
Sure. So actually, pretty close in time to when I did the first episode, I scheduled top surgery for myself. And again, for people who didn't hear the first episode, what that means for me is that I had my breasts removed. And for me, having a flat chest has sort of been the single most desirable physical change to my body since I got breasts, when I was a kid. So for 40 years, basically, I've been living in a body that feels like it's not mine. I have got so many things in my brain going on at once. The first thing I want to say is, so I was talking to a friend of mine actually this morning, who I haven't seen since I had the surgery. And the first thing he said to me was, it's crazy. You are just more you. I just am so clear that you are just more you. He's like, it's really profound. Whatever I thought in my head versus my experience is that you're just more you, which is also how I experience it. When I went to have surgery, a friend of mine gave me this book of poetry by this guy called Young Pueblo.
Okay. And
I'd never read his stuff before. And right after my surgery, while I'm lying around recovering, and I opened a page to this poem, and it says, "Progress is when we forgive ourselves for waiting so long to treat our bodies like a home." And I was like, oh, damn. that's it. That is precisely it. Now, I think in the case of the poet, it had to do with addiction, right? Which is another way of not treating your body like a home. But to like try and contort yourself to live a life in a body that doesn't belong to you is definitely a way of not treating your body like a home. And by the way, it also leads to all other kinds of ways of not treating your body like a home, like using drugs and alcohol or whatever else in order to tolerate, that dissonance.
It stands out to me that the word choice stands out to me, right? Because a home, that Luther Vandross song, "A house is not a home," right? So neither is a home a house. And so, for example, to say that your body is your temple, right, which is something that we've heard, I think speaks to, hey, this is your body, take care of it so you can move around, right? Like it's that. I think it's enough, for me at least, language-wise, to treat your body as a home speaks more to, yes, a certain residency, if you want to call it that. But when I'm home, I feel comfortable. When I'm home, it's warm, right? They leave the light on for me at home. And so warm physically sometimes, but also just a warm place to be. Going into this, as you say, now you feel more you. What was it like a month ago? I guess it was about a month ago when you were feeling less you, right? I mean, you didn't know it as less you. It was just you up to that point. But talk to us
actually,
about that.
I will politely correct you that I didn't feel in my brain. This was already me. I think this is what I have been thinking about a lot, is how, in thinking about whatever identity and neurodiversity and, being non-binary, whatever, is it, my gender is in my brain. That's how I feel. And so for me, it's very hard for my body to feel like home when it didn't feel like my body. It felt like someone else's body that I was stuck in and that I tried very hard to make a life in. I mean, it's super liberating. It feels like someone unlocked a door that had been, sealed shut for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And in terms of my brain, for much of my life, there was some portion of my brain that was always and forever permanently preoccupied with the fact that I felt so bad in my body. It was like kind of like this permanent low-grade static, right? Okay. And that takes up a lot of bandwidth. One of the things that I find most notable is, right, that's gone. That is freed up. That is not, I am not spending any part of my day thinking about how much I hate my chest and feel uncomfortable and how can I keep living like that's just not there, which is, pretty amazing.
So that leads me to the central question of this conversation. We obviously we've talked a little bit. We even had a celebratory dinner. It seems to me, as you say, now there's this congruence, right? You talk about mind, body, and so on. We have all these conversations about holistic, right, approaches to our lives and wanting to, bring our whole selves to work even, and all these things. This is such a definitive step. How and or when did you know that this physical step, bringing your whole self along for this rest of this ride, how and when did you know, this is what I'm doing?
I mean, I talked a little bit about this the last time, which is just to say that there was something about the pandemic and being at home with myself all the time. Mm-hmm. Like it was very hard, much harder to get outside of myself. You could throw yourself into work and bury yourself in work as a way of numbing. Of course, I drank a lot more, which many people did for various reasons. But, part of it was just, I don't know. It became intolerable. And I really reached a moment where I was like, okay, look, you are 53 fucking years old.
Mm-hmm.
So either you are going to live like this with this body for the rest of your life, or you have to change it now. You can't wait any longer. The prospect of staying in the body I had for the rest of my life, right? When I set it up for myself that way, do you get literally now or never?
This is it.
From a health perspective, and I'm going to live a long time because my family has a longevity. How do I want to spend? I just was like, I can't spend the rest of my life like this. I just can't. Yeah. So that was really sort of the moment. And then once I made the decision, for me, it was because it was so what I needed to do. It's interesting when I went to the pre-op appointment. In the doc does 4 pre-op appointments and 4 post-op appointments on the same day, and then does surgery on the other days. And there were a bunch of people in the waiting room who were other pre-op people like me, and then there were some post-op people. And I couldn't help but observe that a number of people in the waiting room were exhibiting outward signs of anxiety, right? The foot tap and the rustling and and I was very conscious of the fact that I didn't feel anxious at all. And I thought, well, maybe that's just denial or fear or something. And when I get to surgery tomorrow, and maybe it'll bubble up. But it didn't. It didn't. I never had a feeling of, and for someone who has experienced a tremendous amount of anxiety in my life, it was remarkable to find, I'm doing what I need to be doing, what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm not worried. I'm just not worried in any way. I just did not feel concerned. And then what was really surreal after the fact was it was like, oh, that's it. It's done. Holy, damn.
Yeah.
2 hours and wow, here I am. Then it started to feel surreal. Not because I didn't feel right, but because not being that way and my body started to feel like, did that ever happen? Was that, did I really live that way? I don't know. I can't say other than I just had this very strange sense of it for something that was supposed to be so momentous.
Right.
It felt so ordinary.
Interesting. So, okay, I'm hearing that, but I think for you in having this particular conversation, the fact that we're talking about your whole self, there's also the roles you play. There are people around you. So I'll start with the lovely child that you described first. What was it like to share the decision that you were going to take this step, and what has it been like having taken this step to interact and yeah.
I think one of the great things is we are living in a different time. And especially right now when everyone feels really frightened for good reasons, it's also true that there are shifts. And I think that for me, I need to hold on. I need to hold on to that because right now it's very easy for me, to start catastrophizing about how they're starting with abortion, but next it'll be my marriage, my kid, all that stuff. And since my kid was a toddler and first started identifying kids and people by gender, I started immediately talking about a gender spectrum and people being boy girls and girl boys and no gender and whatever. And so that's just how she's grown up. And she goes to a school where there's a gender curriculum and has a teacher that openly shares about the teacher's non-binary child. So the environment in which my kid is growing up is about as diametrically opposed to the one I grew up in as imaginable. Which is, of course, that's really lovely. So I wasn't at all worried about how she would handle that aspect. Right? Like, I knew she would get that part. What I was really worried about in my role as her parent, and she is a kid of divorce, and my perspective on myself is that I am her rock. I'm sort of the safe person. And what I was concerned about was that she would be afraid that I wouldn't be able to take care of her, or that she would somehow be unsafe. And so the prep that she and I did ahead of time was entirely about how to be physical with each other in a safe way. Because we're really physical, right? We hug a lot. She sits on me. She lies on me, right? So that's she wasn't going to be able to do that in the way that she was used to. And so she's super into horses. That's one of her things. And so we sort of use taking care of horses as a model for how we could work on her helping to take care of me in a way that would be, safe for me. And I think I actually over-prepared and really thought that I was going to be much more limited than I actually turned out to be. I think I unfortunately convinced her that it was going to be like, I was going to be bedridden and, incapacitated. And it really turned out that physically I had limitations, but there was a lot more I could do than I thought. And I was able to hug her as long as she didn't hug me back. And I think once she experienced me still being her parent, telling her to go brush her fucking teeth and all of the usual things, right. Then I think she felt like, okay, it's okay.
It's okay. And you said you saw your friend. Obviously, we got together. What have been other reactions, or have they kind of been non-reactions? Because as you say, I will say, and we talked about this at dinner, it really didn't feel like, I don't know what I expected. It's almost like you don't see something missing, right? Like but at the same time, I expected more of a difference. Like when I saw you, and I don't even know fully what I mean by that.
Well, but that's interesting, right? Because I think it speaks to the way in which my gender is in my brain and my identity, right? Because I think many people are not even going to notice, because I've been projecting myself and my identity and my gender in the world, right? Anyways, even though it was painfully uncomfortable for me. I had another friend who came to see me, a friend of mine who came to see me immediately after, like maybe 2 days after.
Oh, wow.
Who I hadn't seen in a really long time. And she said to me, I guess if I thought about it, like if I said to myself, do you look different? I could be like, yeah, there's a difference, but not really. Not really. My feeling is that most people will probably build, and the people who I think build it up the most in their heads because they have feelings about it, like my parents or my partner, right? I think that's all about them and their emotional context, as opposed to really about and experience of me.
Let's talk about that a bit, because again, I mean, you're a member of a family. You are,
right.
Child to those parents. You are partner to that partner. What are you experiencing there? And again, with that whole self lens, like this bringing together mind and body now matching and the congruence and all that. What does that mean in terms of those relationships? Are they being reestablished, renegotiated?
Right.
Yeah.
When I came out to my parents in college as being queer, that was a very difficult time for my family. I was raised very religiously. They really struggled. There was a lot of distance and tension between us for a long time. Just with my parents. With my larger extended family, I felt compelled to be closeted because I just really didn't believe that they would deal with it. And so, partly, I moved 3,000 miles away to California and, lived my life and, went home and was, with them. Family is just so insanely important to me because of how I grew up. And the concept of the possibility of being rejected by any of them was just, I really had a hard time imagining how I would deal with that, especially my teta, my grandmother. That took many years to sort of work through all of that and come to a better place with my parents. But ultimately, my little brother is gay. And that kind of became sort of this defining family moment of like, oh, well, like, I guess we have to engage in some kind of change because this isn't going away. My parents, are great people, right? They changed churches. Wow. I think they really pushed themselves hard to educate themselves more. And my, when I got remarried a few years ago, and my brother got married in the same year, and my parents were present and hugely supportive, and it was really an amazing thing to have gone on that journey together as a family. And then I thought to myself, fuck me, I don't want to do all that again, right? Like I don't want another coming out with my parents, I don't want to revisit pain and disconnection from them. And so I was really very worried. I was really very, very concerned about that. And then I decided that what I needed to do is give them the credit that they deserved, which is that they'd done all this work, that they had expressed their love and commitment and support to me, and that I wanted to start from the place of believing that was true. And I wanted to tell them a lot sooner than I ultimately did, but my dad ended up having cancer and blah, blah, blah. So I ended up writing a letter, which is not how I would normally prefer to do things, but I also felt like they were going to need some time to process.
Right. And
I didn't want to put anybody on the spot because I wanted to show them that I really respect them and I have a lot of gratitude. And so that's what I did. I wrote them a letter that really came from a place of, like, I have so much gratitude. I have so much gratitude for you guys and for how hard you worked and for, being there. And even if it takes you some time to process, unlike when I was a teenager, I am not afraid that you're going to cut me out or abandon me. I hope my kid can feel the same way about me. And so I just explained. When I was in my prior relationship, I wanted to have top surgery. But at that time, I was in a very unhealthy, toxic relationship, and I had really made myself very small and kind of abandoned myself in many, many different ways. And my then spouse was not supportive of my desire to have that surgery. And because I was really lost to myself at that time, I just abandoned myself in that way as well. And I had a breast reduction surgery. And so in my letter to my parents, I talked a little bit about the fact that, as they knew firsthand, that I had spent many years being dominated and controlled and abandoning myself. And I didn't do the thing that I needed to do then. I was anxious about their response, but, my dad sent me this amazing text message, where, he was just like, I got your letter and thank you. And I love you no matter what. And this is something outside of my ken, and, I can't give you any advice about it. I'm sorry you had to have 2 procedures. And when I read that, I thought, whoa, wow. All of it mattered, but that part really mattered to me.
Tell me why that part really mattered.
Because I think he got that. To me, it meant that he got that I'd suffered unnecessarily.
And when you talk about that suffering, and we don't need to, or as much as you want to, sure, but I'm not meaning to sort of like delve back into, your last relationship or anything like that. But I guess as we're talking about our whole selves, and so this holistic approach to life, there's got to be a challenge around figuring out just how much of me I get to be if I'm going to be with you. And I guess I'd like to speak to that experience, because my sense is there's something you were saying then, and also in a different social context, right? Like, I think things have moved in this country in a way around some of these issues, but putting that aside for a moment, you were saying to at least one of the people who was closest to you in the world, I'm not getting to be my whole self. This whole self thing everybody's talking about, like, I'm left out of that right now. What was it like to negotiate around that?
Well, it wasn't much of a negotiation. I mean, okay. It was really, I really mean that in the truest sense, that I abandoned myself. Like, anytime that what I felt like I needed or wanted didn't satisfy that person, it didn't happen. I just didn't do it, whatever it might be. And, I've talked about this in other contexts, but, I really, like, that was not fine for me, but I was only doing that to myself. But when my kid came along, it was like, oh, right. So yeah, this isn't the model. This isn't the model I want for my kid. And so I started reclaiming myself, right? First by getting divorced, and getting my own place, and, just sort of finding my way back to myself. My dad still, to this day, says things to me like, we'd be having a conversation about something, I don't know what, and he'll just say to me, he'll look at me and say, I'm so glad you're back. I'm just so glad you're back. Which is a scary thing to hear the first time I heard it.
Yeah. And to be clear, that's in reference to that marriage. There was a version of you that existed that felt like you were on some level gone.
Yep. For him. So
why was that frightening to hear?
Because it meant that it had been true for a really long time.
I didn't make it up. That really happened. That kind of, okay.
And also coming from my dad. And I don't know, there was just something, it just felt very raw. It was getting divorced, taking my life back, having my own space, that kind of started me, right? Coming back to myself, writing again, doing those rant and raves were really a big deal, right? To actually transform my experience into art.
Yeah. I want to jump in there for a second, and I want to come back to the broader point that was being made, but it was truly my pleasure, and I don't mean that in a you're welcome kind of way. I mean, it truly was my pleasure to work with you, to bring you in. I got to guest produce, to share with the listeners who might not know. Rant Rave is a storytelling show that has been running. It's over 100 now times that they've done the show, but it's a monthly show. And usually writers, performers get a prompt, and it's about 1,500 words, 12 to 15-minute pieces. And Kam has created some seriously powerful stuff that I had the privilege to be able to work through with her as a producer and help with editing and sort of chopping up what we wanted the ideas to be. So I want to give a little bit of context there, but also to speak to the fact that I had an experience with Rant and Rave where I feel like there had been a lot of things I'd worked on over time, and suddenly the storytelling piece came together in a really cool way for me. It was a way to bring in stand-up that I had done. It was a way to bring in all sorts of other stuff for my life, stuff I'm more serious about, all these things. And people talk about finding your voice, and I get why we use that phrase. But in many ways, I think those pieces helped me find myself in this new version of me, right? Like you're living and you're living and you're living. And in every moment, that whole thing about in every moment we die, right? We die to the next moment. And so I guess I was getting to know that new version that I hadn't necessarily explored quite as well. As you were finding that, maybe even specifically through the writing piece, what was that part like that it seems culminated in your physical choice to say, okay, this is what I'm doing?
Right. No, I mean, I'm going to say something that sounds ridiculous and so cliched, but art is fucking transformational. It's not that the stories weren't in me or weren't,
sure.
But that was another way in which I was abandoning myself, which was not living creatively. The process of both writing and performing is not just intellectual, but it's also emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like what all of that started for me was starting to get sort of my thoughts and my feelings together and more in alignment and more attuned to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so at a certain point, it was only ever going to make sense, really, right, to have the body piece also be part of that. And people talk about this kind of stuff, right? Like, the mind-body split or whatever, or,
sure.
or the brain and the body are connected. But it's like there's a difference between just like saying those words,
right,
and then actually living the meaning of those words.
Mm-hmm.
And, binaries of all kinds are bad for us, in my opinion. Not just gender binaries, but like when we think about exercising or working out, most of us, maybe not all of us, some very enlightened people, not me, who, are like, I'm going to go exercise because it's good for my body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people are not like, I'm going to go, lift some weights because it's good for my brain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some people understand it, but I mean, for the most part, we have a tendency to think of our minds and our bodies as really being separate.
Yeah.
That's how I lived. Much of my life is completely is dissociated from my body. It's just all in my brain, and then being in a relationship that kept me there and enabled me to keep abandoning myself. Like I don't want to just put blame on, some other person. Like I made choices. I volunteered.
Of course.
I'm not just, some victim.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think I was badly harmed also,
Sure.
but that piece of like, I made some choice to stay disconnected from myself. And that's why I was in that relationship. And so when I started choosing to be connected to myself again,
you couldn't be in that relationship.
I could not be in that relationship, but long term, I couldn't be in that body.
So there's a particular word you've used several times now that I think deserves some attention, and that's abandon. To abandon is not simply to deny, to abandon, right? It's not simply to leave. To abandon is a specific thing, and it includes, in my hearing of it, it includes not just leaving behind, right? But it includes the vulnerability of the one who's been left, right? If I abandon someone, for me, when I hear that, put it this way, if I'm out with Mike Tyson, I can't abandon Mike Tyson in a fight because he gonna be fine. He abandoned my ass. I can't abandon him. The word abandon implies, or perhaps I'm inferring, a vulnerability that was the result of the abandonment. And I guess I'm wondering, one, does that resonate? And two, did you feel abandoned otherwise? Did you join the crowd in abandoning, or was this is just you with yourself and what you're dealing with?
Being vulnerable was dangerous on many levels, right? Mm-hmm. So being emotionally vulnerable in that relationship was dangerous. Mm-hmm. And being in that body, which I hated so much, and I wanted to escape from. Mm-hmm. So when I say I abandoned myself, I mean I wasn't claiming myself. I was making myself, disconnecting myself from myself, from my feelings, from my own needs, from my creativity. Mm-hmm. It felt unsafe, for sure. Earlier in my life, I felt abandoned by my parents when I didn't feel like they could see me. Mm-hmm. Definitely, felt abandoned by my then spouse when that relationship became something other than what I thought it was, and just really harmful and denigrating. And for me, it means that, it's leaving behind myself. And to me, abandonment means like not coming back. I really mean it when I can't say it enough. It was the fact of my child. It was like, oh my God, like I can't leave myself behind. Like I have this kid. I have to, it's just not, it's just not optional. It was like,
you couldn't be the mother you wanted to be if you were going to be an abandoner of self.
Right. Yep. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to actually backtrack a bit because, obviously we're talking about this, post-stop moment and so on. One of the things that's come up recently is a friend of mine on social media, an old friend, basically put up this post. It was sort of around, it seems like it was around all this Florida, don't say gay stuff. And essentially was some quote that I'm not even sure was a real quote, but, essentially this language around like some boys feel like girls and some girls feel more like boys and, and his post was essentially, this is ridiculous. Who needs to be telling these things to 5-year-olds? And I made contact with him privately and essentially said, let's discuss this a little more with you. He's known me for years, so he knows I didn't call to say, I didn't reach out to say, I think you nailed that one. Something he said in response, and we've yet to have the full dialogue, we will, was that he's, all for people having their rights, but he doesn't believe that some schools should be teaching 5-year-olds about the birds and the bees. And I feel like that there's that energy is woven into this conversation somehow. The sense that it's a discussion of sex. And sure, we can try to be open-minded, but let's let people get to adulthood first and then we'll deal with it. But you shared in the episode, and even in some things that we didn't even get into in the episode, that you were not a sexual adult when the realities of this were first clear to you. And so I'm just wondering if you can speak to that experience, because I think having all that distance traveled where you were, you basically had people demanding of you that you abandon, probably made abandoning feel like, maybe you've got a point in the end, or it made it easier to do. I obviously could be wrong. I've not been down your road, but
I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong. Mm-hmm. Well, let's start here. Let's start with, so you're in preschool.
Right.
And the teachers start identifying you and other children as boys and girls. Is that sexual? It presumes the binary.
Yes.
And it's hard. Change on this level, cultural change on this level is exceedingly hard.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's interesting because my general practitioner, who I really love and who's been doing, transgender care for like 30 years or something.
Oh, okay.
He said, it's really like anything in medicine, I have to tell you. He's like, when people first figured out, that there were, there was some kind of thing that caused a particular mitral valve problem, it was like black and white. It was this thing or it wasn't this thing. And then, over time, right, medicine evolves and we get more experience and more evidence. And, we discovered that, actually, no, it's more complex than that. And we don't stop and just say, oh, well, we have new information, but fuck it.
Right.
Right. And he said, and I really appreciated this because he's the person who made it neurocognitive for me, right? I've always talked about it being in my brain, but he said to me, it's molecular. It's molecular. And I was like, oh, wow, that is really interesting to think about it in those terms. Because I think what we're going to figure out, in my opinion, as time progresses in many areas, is that it just turns out the brain is rich, complex, and more varied than human beings were aware of or wanted to be aware of. And everything is a spectrum.
Yeah.
A question I always come back to is, who benefits from the way things are? Why is someone threatened by X, Y, or Z particular change? It's usually about power and control and maintaining power and control. What is to be afraid of? What's play that out? Go ahead, play that out. What happens? What happens to you if I have top surgery? What happens to where is the outcome measure that says this is a disaster and dangerous, right?
Right. It'll be Sodom and Gomorrah around here. I mean, it'll be chaos.
Exactly. Which gets a little bit into that conversation that you and I were having briefly about the spiritual and, right, that guy I was talking to about the difference between Jesus and Paul, right? And it's like, I'm like, who is Jesus going to exclude?
Absolutely no.
You know what? You're not in. Paul was the institution builder. Jesus was a radical. And so all of that for me is just, I feel like what we're watching play out at multiple levels are the last gasps of a certain segment of our society. And I'm not saying that they aren't going to make it really ugly for people for as long as they can.
Yeah.
But it's sheer terror on their part. It's like the writing is on the wall.
Right.
Change has come. Change is coming. It's not going to stop. So what do we have to do? Well, we can go back to controlling people's bodies. And it's like a desperate last stand of the empire. And that doesn't mean it won't be ugly, right? Like the last stand is no joke, right?
Right.
But I don't think we'd be where we would be if they weren't so frightened.
It's interesting, the frightened piece, for a couple of reasons, because I think one is the set of questions you ask, right? Which sometimes when people there's a great sort of, internet videos, right? There's this video of this kid, sort of splashing and flailing about and clearly about to drown until someone gives them a hand up and it's like water up to like their thigh. You know what I mean? And I feel like, so I think, for me, the experience of this has a couple of levels, but one is that, right? One is knock it off. you said if we allowed, first of all, like what? But okay, if we allowed for there to be, these gay areas in certain cities, like that was going to be the end of those cities. Those cities would be up in flames, and that didn't happen. And then, okay, so we started living, and then you've got, Will and Grace and Ellen. Okay, great. And then, okay, marriage. Now this is it. It's all going to go up in flames, and it doesn't. So there's part of me that's like, okay, it's not quite the scientific method, but my hypothesis is that we can figure out how to run a society where we sometimes need to use they, and the place isn't going to go up in flames again.
I just want to talk about they for one quick minute, okay? I always use for my pronouns she, they, right? Okay. I have no investment in they personally.
Okay.
But from a bigger societal standpoint,
yeah,
I got it on there because it's important. Mm-hmm. And here's what drives me nuts. When people say bullshit like, it's not even grammatical. Or
let's do it.
Or it's too hard. And I'm like, okay, so when you say the following, so-and-so is having a party and invited a friend, I don't know where they're coming from because the person didn't tell you whether or not it was male or female. People who complain about they or their use it all day, every day, just not with people who ask to be identified that way.
That's it.
I mean, that's nuts. I'm sorry. Don't give me, please don't give me that shit. I'm over that.
Yeah, I love that you went down this road, and because for me, and I think you're pointing us to it, but for me, there's this stage and phase, and I think maybe that's part of what I was saying about like the gay marriage. But there's a stage and phase. To me, we are that grammatical thing is rhetorical civil unions, right? It's just like, oh, I want to feel like I'm a quote unquote good person. So yeah, I'm really accepting, but I do think there's a fundamental difference in how do I like do enough yoga to contort myself into that. And it's like, no, actually, it's not that complicated. As you're saying, it's not that complicated. If I say someone dropped their wallet, no one's like, wait a minute, is that everyone's wallet? Like, no one gets confused. You're 100% correct. And I think so much of it is just that need. Like, I actually don't want to change. My brain is telling me, oh, but you're a good person, whatever it is. So I'm trying to reconcile it. And so I'm trying to make it about anything I think I can sell. And I think some people are doing that consciously. And I think some people are doing that quite unconsciously. I think they don't even recognize that it's just your own resistance. I shared with a young person in my life, please forgive me. Like, I'm going to just ask in advance and know that this is 100% about my synapses having been through some things over, almost half a century, and nothing to do with you or what you can choose to be called or decide to be called. And I just, how is the they, them thing not us revisiting his mama called him Clay, so I'ma call him Clay? Like, if I say this is what I want to be called, what are we even discussing?
I just want to bring it back to the base. The base is about power, control, and ownership.
Yes.
And this just feels like one other way that escapes that. Right?
Absolutely correct.
They, them is a fugitive slave.
It is. Right? It's 100% one. Sorry, go ahead.
So I just, at least right now, although it may not stay that way, queer people of color are still at very, 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 very high risk of being locked up or otherwise harmed, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're people of color.
Right.
And the only thing right now, anyway, I think that stops more of that is that, you'd have to lock up a lot of white people. And there's a lot of the good queers who don't even want to be called queer, who are like, you guys are making it all so hard for us. Like, we just wanted to be normal folks. We just wanted to get married and, right? They just wanted to assimilate. And the big problem with people like me and people who want to use they, them, theirs is like, it's a refusal to assimilate.
Yes.
No, thank you.
And just today, I was listening to an interview where someone got into, and I guess I will attribute and give some respect to Brene Brown, because I guess it started. They were referencing a conversation that Brene Brown had, but the distinction between belonging, and she actually called the opposite, that the opposite of belonging is fitting in. And I thought, oh my God, right? And that assimilation piece that you're pointing to, I think it's incredibly important that we address. That is a fundamental American, right? The melting pot or whatever. It's always be less you, don't end. And whenever the answer is no, I don't want to be less me. I actually would like to be me. I only get to be here this one time, and I figure I'd be me while I'm here. That is consistently a problem. And it's a problem for the Black women who had to imagine having to fight for legislation that says it is okay for you
to do my hair.
But seriously, wrap your mind around that. I totally buy that someone would say, I've got men, I've got women, I've got boys, I've got girls. I'm not interested in doing this other work. For me, also comes up there is, if I'm able to construct a reality where, as a man, I'm this, and that means women are not this, there can't be a continuum. How do I protect my privilege? How do I protect my territories, my ill-gotten gains, all of it, if we're saying, actually, this periodic table has a whole lot of shit, and when we used to think it was fire, water, earth, like we didn't really have it figured out yet, I feel like that's where we are walking out of in terms of gender, damn near. It's like, it turns out fire, water, like air, like those aren't actually the elements. There's this thing called oxygen. There's another thing called carbon. Like, I think with that, incapable en masse of having anything resembling an intelligent conversation on this.
I hate to harp on my same old story, but I will, because you just go back to the founding. It's really simple. Rich white guys, right? Mm-hmm. Wanted power and control. So Who did they control? Women.
Yep.
Black people, Native Americans. And what did that require? Well, you can't be a person. You can't be a person. And so every which way, anytime people try to assert their personhood,
that's it,
outside of that ideology, there's a problem. Power just constantly is able to morph and recontain. And so my response to that is, same old shit. The only thing we can do is make art.
Say more about that.
Well, I was like, it's just, there's a straight line from like Jonathan Edwards in 1600s Massachusetts talking about being the light on the hill and make America great again. It's the same thing. And to me, to the extent we're talking about being holistic and not abandoning ourselves, the piece that is about being creative, being embodied, and putting our creative embodied selves in the world is the way to resist. Because we don't have an army. And I always thought that the electoral process was pretty suspect, but it turns out now that that's true in a different way.
Yeah.
I think, for me, our friendship, our way of thinking together, for me, is like a great form of resistance, right? I think all we have is connection. And so if we can't connect to ourselves, we're not going to really be able to connect to others in a truly authentic way. And I think the only way we make a difference is to have authentic connections with other people. And you were talking about your dad and body, mind, spirit, and I do not consider myself a religious person, but to the extent that anybody wants to label this spiritual, for me, authentically connecting with other human beings, especially in a creative way, but certainly in an authentic way, that is the movement of the spirit between us. And I don't need anything else. And I think that by itself is really powerful.
One, agreed. I actually said to a writing partner I had years ago, when I'm creating, that's the closest I feel to God. So I 100% hear you on that. I'm wondering, in a world and in our worlds where we're not only sometimes encouraged not to go fully into being our whole selves, but where we, there can be real danger, like you laid out. I mean, let's be, victims of violence. How do we step into that? How do we carve out the space for ourselves? If one way is creating art, okay. But what are some other ways that we make room for ourselves and others to make the connection you're talking about? Because I think we're actively encouraged not to. Like, I think as a Black person, when you say and keep buying shit, one of the things I am encouraged, frankly, to buy is whiteness. Now I may say no thank you sometimes, but there is a level on which, right, they'll sell it to me if I want to buy it, and that shows up in all sorts of ways. So what are some other ways in which we can be making room for ourselves and one another to be more our whole selves, to make that connection and at least have that starting point? One
thing I think about, because I say make art in this kind of toss it off kind of way, and one of the many problems of capitalism is the way in which art is professionalized, because that's the way it can become a commodity. And one of a great pleasure of mine from having my kid is re-engaging with all kinds of things that I denied myself because grown-ups don't do that, right? So we do a lot of drawing. We do a lot of painting. We do all kinds of arts and crafts. And that is a part of being a human being, is being creative. And you don't have to be a professional in order to do it or take satisfaction from it. But we're sort of made to think that, right? Because, well, I'm not an artist. Well, I'm not a writer. Well, I'm not a poet. Well, I'm not, whatever. Well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about being connected to yourself through art. So I think that's one way, and it's an important way, because I think, most people, when most people are talking about work-life balance, they're talking about being able to go jogging as part of their day and not only work. I'm talking about, actually doing something that's meaningful to you for no good reason at all, other than it's giving you some pleasure, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you took it, or you defined or described it in that expanded way, because Seth Godin, who I think the world of, and been doing stuff through Akimbo, talks about the fact that that's and actually I'll post this particular TED Talk on We Aligned for anybody who wants to check it out, and I'll put the link in the notes as well. But talks about that's our job now, is to make art. And one of the things I like about is he hammers away on this point, and I've seen him talk about it multiple times, where it's not a matter of art is something you hang on the wall, or right, the song you sing. There's all sorts of ways that can show up. And I think when a teacher who figures out how to communicate the real lessons of that novel, that to me, that's art. That's an art. and I've watched, and when I was a teacher, we slack-jawed. Sue O'Hara is a friend of mine who was a mentor for me when I, like 22 years old, stepping into this school, like, oh yeah, I'm in charge. But would just come up with these ideas. And I'd be like, what the hell? And it was of her, and it was right from her. So I think there's so many ways we do that I think it is important. And I think if more of us did it, there'd be less commitment to stopping others from doing it. I think both are true. I think as we do it, we encourage others to join us. But I think you also have fewer people who are so vehemently and violently opposed to you doing it. I mean, there's this sort of trope of the, anti-gay politician who we all just sort of like tap our foot and wait to hear the story of them in some men's room, right? But I think there's something beyond that. If you've abandoned yourself, there's something, I think, that's extra painful, frightening, all sorts of words about watching someone not abandon themselves.
Because it means that they have power over themselves.
Yes.
Which you might not like very much. You wanted to have that power.
Right. I guess finally, and that the last question is closer to what we usually end on, but there's a specific conversation. This is a follow-up. And you've been on, quite a journey, and we've heard your journey from 3-year-old tomboy, to present day mind body aligned Kam. Where from here?
Oh, the other piece that is really interesting for me is, like, I feel like having the surgery was like opening a door for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm approaching, an end to my current career trajectory. I got about another year and a half, or maybe a little less than that now. And, for a long time, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go do this other thing, because I'll make some money. And that sounds good for a while. And the more I thought about it, the less appealing it became, because it's more of the same. And I started to feel like I'm done. I don't want more of the same. I want to feel good about myself doing what I'm doing. And whatever I do, I want to feel like I'm connecting with people. And I want to be creative, and I just found myself realizing that there's no going back. There's only more opening, and that is both scary for me, as head of household, mortgage person, parent, but it's attractive, it's appealing, it's got some juice there. Like, it's because I want to show up. I want to show up as me. That's the bottom line. I want to keep showing up as me.
And it's interesting, and I didn't plan this, but you've, for years, since the initial betrayal of your body not doing what you clearly felt was appropriate to how you felt, you've been on this path of like, how do I get these two to do and come with it to be together? And, as you talk about the experience you weren't having as you did these other things, and now you're having that experience along with getting the thing that you wanted, that's sort of the definition of reaching the point. And what we always talk about is the point is always a new starting point, at least potentially if you choose for it to be. And that's what I'm hearing from you as you talk about the doors that are opening and where from here. And, I know I'll get to hear about some of that. We may even get to share again down the line with the audience here, but, it's been truly inspiring. And I really mean that. I think we say that about stories all the time, right? Oh, I saw a story, some kid hit a softball and the other kid brought it back to him, and it's like, it's very sweet, but I'm not sure I'm inspired. But I am inspired by your story and by your commitment to wrestle with some of these humongous ideas. Both the ones that you personally face in your life, but that you see the people around you facing, that you see the world face, like your commitment to saying, yeah, there are a lot of continuums out there needing to be sorted out, and I'm going to be on the front line of doing that work. So
it's interesting that you said that. I'll end on this, which is, so I have a tattoo, and it goes around my waist, kind of like it would be a belt. And it's a quote from Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Masks. And translated, it says, "Oh, my body, make me always a man who questions himself." And I say that now because what we are talking about and what you and I have talked about before is the way in which we may be less interested in answers than we are in questions.
Absolutely.
And where they lead us. And for me, that I had that tattooed on my body many, many, many years before I actually had this surgery. But it was a message to myself.
I love that you're the kind of person who's got a Fanon quote tattooed.
I'm sure.
I feel a little. I feel like you just tried to like show me up. Like,
no,
wait a minute.
People are gonna be like, "Oh, that pompous asshole! What a fucking pompous person!"
I love that. I love that. And I love you.
I love you back. Love you back.
Yeah, big.
All day, every day.
Y'all know what time it is. It's time to walk the line. Yeah, the tone of this walk the line might be a little different, but I feel like this interview was a little bit different. Not just because it was our only follow-up, but because it was an opportunity for me to really have a conversation with a friend and to bring that conversation to folks in an area that people have a lot of conversations about. And I know that some people are having some struggles around, but there was something about my conversation with Kam that really led me to what I think should be our walk the line from here. Accept yourself. It sounds sort of simple, I guess, but I know I've had my challenges with it. And obviously Kam has been unbelievably generous and open in sharing the challenges they've had with it. And I'm gonna go ahead and guess that there might be somebody out there listening or watching, maybe not you, who at some point has had that piece about themselves. And you're probably thinking like, oh yeah, Orlando, well, you may have that and Kam may have this, but you don't have this thing. And while I am all about making changes in our lives, while I am all about making sure that we're becoming the people we want and need and deserve to become, I know the power and importance of accepting ourselves, of not abandoning ourselves, of loving ourselves. And we can love ourselves on that kind of a basic level. We're going to start becoming the kind of people, individually and collectively, who can love others, even the others who are being othered. So accept yourself. Until next time, I want to thank you for listening, liking, subscribing, sharing. Tell your friends so they can tell their friends so they can tell their friends. And we can keep getting the word out there that you can get unstuck. And you can be unstuck. And like our friend Kam, you can live unstuck. Unstuck as fuck. Now, let's walk the line.